is here. And the hardest working man when it comes to NBA trade deadline, well, we'll put him up there with Joe Molinax and others. His name is Parker Fleming, one of the most talented and kindest people when it comes to covering the Memphis Grizzlies. Good friend of the show, good friend of mine. Always glad to have him. Parker, how are you this evening, sir?
Shawn, you're the real kind one here for putting up with all my technical difficulties here. But I'm doing good, man. We have about 18 hours until the trade deadline, and it I'm ready for it. I'm ready for all the chaos. Stuff's already drunk right now, and I just want to see how the trade deadline keeps throwing back tequila shots, especially that Portland Trailblazers GM. I already made this joke on GBB Live, and I'm going to make it on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. At this rate, I think the Portland Trailblazers would trade Josh Hart to the Grizzlies for Nathan Chester and a heavy protected second-round pick. So
Wonder which would be more valuable long term, Nathan or it would be the second round pick. It definitely would be. So, but yeah, no, we're glad to have you, Parker. Obviously, Parker is a friend of the show. Has been on many times before. You can check out both of our written works over at Grizzly Bear Blues. Parker on GBB Live, which has a new show out today. Also, the Longview podcast, really awesome podcast Parker does on a weekly basis, discussing bi-weekly discussing the Grizzlies, from a future, aspect point of things. But you can check myself out at Stats SEC on Twitter, the show at Locked On Grizz, Parker at Paca_Flocka, and obviously check out YouTube as well. Want to remind you of our title sponsor of the show, betonline.net. So, Parker, I'm just going to come out and ask real quickly before we get into some different scenarios and some different ideas going into this trade deadline. I know we're excited about seeing what can happen around the trade deadline. But the point of it is, how good does it feel to be cheering and covering for a team that whether they make a move or not, you're still going to be absolutely excited about the Grizzlies the next day? How awesome does that feel with how special this season's been so far?
I'm just going to quote everyone else around the Grizzly sphere, whether it's the fans, the media, the social media team, maybe even the Grizzly players themselves, and just say the vibes are good right now. The vibes are so good. The Grizzlies have a superstar that's only 22 years old, all-star in year 3. Their other cornerstone that's in year 4, also 22, is looking like a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate, and he should have been an all-star in his own right. And then you just have such a great cast around. I mean, Desmond Bane, some nights he looks like the legitimate borderline all-star kind of guy to have next to John Morant at the 2 spot. I think he makes it feel better as far as like, oh, should the Grizzlies trade for a starting 2 guard? How many are you going to find that better than Desmond Bane? Brandon Clark and how he's just, as Anthony Sane said, he's a morale killer with his alley-oops, how he can score in flurries. Zaire Williams flashes here and there. Steven Adams passes. I mean, they just do a lot of fun stuff every single night. I wrote in our report card, it's crazy that last Tuesday night you had the Grizzlies play against the Clippers, and you have their history of like grit and grind Grizzlies. They grind it out, don't shoot a lot of threes. They zig while others zag. And then you have the Clippers back in that day, they were Lob City. And this Grizzlies team is like a mashup of both. Like, they want to beat the hell out of teams inside the arc and get into the paint, but they're also going to fly in transition, and they're going to throw up some lobs. It's quite fun. It's quite fun to know that no matter what move they make, for one, they're going to be a top 6 seed. They're going to make the playoffs. They may have home court. They may make it to the second round. They may make it to the Western Conference Finals. It's fun. It's really fun. But also, too, I know something that you're very big fan of is they have multiple avenues in which they could get to championship status through moves because of cap space, young players on good contracts, draft picks. Like, it's a very unique time right now to be a Grizzlies fan, I must say.
And that's the thing that I'll say is that, again, like you said, whether it's a first round exit, it's a hard fought second round exit, it's the Western Conference Finals, a la the Atlanta Hawks last year. All of those things certainly are on the table. But the thing that stands out to me, Parker, 2 players, Desmond Bane just got announced into the 3-point shooting contest. You've got Steven Adams, who is doing so much without the ball. When you look at this team, you're looking at them needing potentially another big. You're looking at them potentially needing more three-point shooting. But I bring up Desmond Bane and Steven Adams, who they are so good in their roles, Parker, that you basically are just kind of fine over the next 2 months, just letting the other rotation pieces that you have figure out those needs with what you've already got. That's what stands out about Desmond Bane and Steven Adams. You've got all of your rotation players performing in their roles so well, it doesn't really make sense to give up a significant asset package for an upgrade because you already have players doing so well in the roles that they're supposed to do well in.
They're in a very unique spot that they can just wait for the postseason and address their needs. If it looks like they need some sort of spacer at the center spot, or they want to commit to Jaren Jackson Jr. being the center, they can go find the guy that they want to be the four next to him, whether it's Brandon Clark or somebody they want to acquire. If they feel like they need to make an upgrade from Dylan Brooks, he's a favorable contract, an expiring contract. You could put some stuff around him. Maybe you can go get somebody big. Their bench scoring. If there's just not a lot of oomph in the bench, they can go get a guy. I can't really rattle off names off the top of my head, but they have the assets to go get a guy. I think that's the beauty of what the Grizzlies are doing right now. I know usually you want to be proactive instead of reactive, but I think in this spot you got to be reactive because you can't mess up what you have. I mean, this is a team that's been the best team in the league or best team in the West since the 1st of December. Like, it's the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, if it happens where you don't do anything and you lose in the first round in 6 or 7 games, or you lose in the second round, it's not the end of the world because, like, now what you need. Now at that point, it's something you need to fix because in the first place, it's not broken. So now it's like, okay, this didn't work. Let's assess it and let's go fix it so that we can get past that in year 4 of Grizz Next Gen.
And that's the other thing that you mentioned is that, we talk about the fact that if the Grizz don't do something, again, you want to be proactive versus reactive. But teams aren't this proactive, right? A reason why the Grizzlies are going to be as fine as possible is because the Grizzlies have had such a positive and prosperous track record of being proactive over the past 2 years. Everything they've been proactive about, they've hit a home run on, even to the point of trading a Grayson or a Jonas, or to the point of trading up to get a Desmond Bane. Such a rich history of being proactive during Zach Kleiman's era is what makes it to where the Grizzlies are fine. As you said, the vibes are going to stay constantly immaculate, whether they make a trade or not. And that really stands out as a good place to be. But however, before we go into segment 2, Parker, I'm going to ask you this question. When you look at this team, and this will kind of direct our conversation from there, what do you think are the 2 biggest needs? I kind of talked about, in my opinion, three-point shooting, a reliable big man is probably what makes the most sense. But what do you think is the 2 biggest needs for this team right now?
Half court offense for sure. Maybe some perimeter bench scoring. It's weird to say that the Grizzlies need firepower off the bench because they're 11th right now at bench scoring. It's not like they're a bottom 5 bench team. The starters are carrying them. Like, they have very good depth. You have Brandon Clark, who's made this big research. Tyus Jones, probably the best backup point guard in basketball right now. D'Anthony Melton as a guy that on a given night he can go for 15 points, and that's pretty solid. But like, I kind of need a little bit of consistency, a guy that can create his own offense in the half court, and maybe solved with. But they pulled Jaren Jackson out in him and Desmond Bane out in the first rotations of the substitutions, the first quarter. And then they have both of those guys come back in at the start of the second while John Morant's resting. So some more lineup staggering. And even then, like, when you get Dylan Brooks back, take out Jaren, take out Dylan Brooks. you saw Desmond Bain out there with Ja. Like, I think that's the case. And I guess one thing I'll spin around to you and ask you is, like, with the way the lineup's been going and such, how the starting lineup's been, even though we had that data from a starting lineup with Dylan Brooks, I think they outscored their opponents by 18 points per 100 possessions. Like, is there a non-zero chance that Dylan Brooks comes back and he's just the sixth man? Just because they need some of that firepower and they need what Dylan Brooks provides. Like, with the way this dynamic of the team shifted, like, do you need Dylan Brooks in that high usage role, or can you keep Dylan Brooks in that high usage role with the bench role? What are your thoughts?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to real quickly save that for the start of the second segment of our show. Before we get to that, I'm going to talk with you a bit about betonline.net. Betonline.net is awesome because it allows for you to be able to find a way to bet and wager on your favorite sports at one of the best sites you possibly can. The fastest and easiest way for you to bet on everything. Pro football, obviously, is the Super Bowl coming up, but pro and college hoops, NHL boxing, UFC. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new and amazing offers available for the 2022 season. Bet online where the game starts. Also want to remind you to tune in today, 2 to 4, for the Locked On NBA podcast trade deadline special. All the things going on, all the rumors. If the Grizzlies make a move, I'll be there. You'll see my smiling face, not Parker's, my smiling face. Talking about all things Grizzlies when it comes to, obviously, the trade deadline. Parker, to get to your question, here's my thoughts. I have been very vocal about the fact that I think that in a contending team, Dylan Brooks is your sixth man. But in this iteration of the Grizzlies, Dylan Brooks needs to be a starter as much as possible when he gets back. And the reason why is because those numbers that you're talking about, there is such a small sample size right now of that because he's been injured so much this year. You want to get him acclimated with Ja, Bain, and Jaren as much as possible for two reasons. Number one, you want that starting lineup with Steven Adams to get as acclimated as possible to begin games, because I truly think for the Grizzlies offense in playoff situations, big starts, great early starts, especially defensively, are going to be huge to them winning playoff games. But the other thing is you want to get as many minutes as possible for Ja, Dylan, and Desmond to find their success on the perimeter offensively. So I think that Dylan certainly could make sense as the sixth man, but at the end of the day, any lineup that you have where Ja and Desmond are leading your offense, Dylan and Jaren are leading your defense, you want those four playing as much as possible. Start them, close with them, with only around 25 games left in the season. That's why I think you start Dylan Brooks moving forward.
You passed the test. You passed the test of Dylan Brooks Island. Thank you very much. I do think he needs to be a starter mainly because he can check the opposing team's best perimeter player better than anyone else on the team, especially when it comes to big physical guys like Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Devin Booker. He's played a big amount of minutes against Steph. I think he's that guy. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be a very interesting dynamic, but yeah, I was just wondering if it's one of those things where, like, is there a way for you to fill those needs that you need to fill with somebody currently on your roster? And that's just a solution. That's a potential possibility, but I mean, I think this is a very data-driven coaching staff, very data-centric front office. If they see that the lineup with their favorable starting lineup has a net rating of 18 points per 100 possessions, they're going to ride with that. It's like, okay, it works. Let's keep it testing. That's what the All-Star break is going to be for. And luckily, they have a very favorable schedule where they can tinker with those lineups a little bit and get ready for a postseason push.
And data analytics, data-driven decisions are what bring me to my next point as we start looking at potential moves that could be made. So let's break this down real quick, Parker. We know that Ja, Desmond, Dylan, Jaren Jackson Jr. are going to be your four starting and closing, right? You've got Steven Adams starting. We'll throw in Brandon Clark as the guy who replaces Steven Adams in a closing lineup. And then in a playoff type rotation, you've still got Tyus. You've still got DeAnthony Melton. We mentioned Brandon Clark, Steven Adams, Kyle Anderson, obviously, if you're expecting him to still be around. Zaire Williams probably is the 10th man in that rotation, though you're probably not seeing him play too many playoff minutes. My thought process on that is this then, is that if you've already got your playoff rotation set, my focus becomes making a move at the trade deadline that doesn't necessarily focus on right now, but replaces someone at the end of your roster who could be more valuable in the future. And that brings into play what's likely the most played out scenario for the Grizzlies, which is Jarrett Culver. $6 million with his contract this year, an expiring contract, which is attractive to many teams, but also a late first. Parker Fleming, the reason I mention this is because names like, potentially a Cam Reddish. I threw out a Kenrich Williams. I don't think that Culver plus a first really, I don't think that Kenrich is worth that. But Culver in a few seconds. Yeah, he's fine. Whatever. MJF, whoever, Jungle Boy's better. Anywho, my point is that using Culver in a late first or a couple of seconds to potentially go get a player who not only can help you out this year if you were to need it, but especially next year plays a part. I think the Grizzlies could find some value if they were to focus on the future, even if it's not someone who helps out in the rotation this year. I think there's that type of move at this deadline.
I'm very interested to see what they do with the Culver situation, because I think he does have value for a team that's like, we don't have much to play for right now. Let's just see what he can do. If he looks good, we'll bring him back into our system next season on like a 2-10. But it's interesting. I would be more inclined to maybe add him to another player and see what can happen. For one, my favorite trade possibility, to be honest, was Jimmy Lamb or Justin Holiday for Culver in a second. It's just a low maintenance dude. Gives you more options on your wings. Kendrick Williams, he's fine. Very mid, to be honest. But if the Grizzlies were like, hey, here's Culver in 2 seconds for Kendrick Williams, I'll take it.
Your favorite NBA shooter would be very happy, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. Keep the best friends vibes going. You already got Jaren and X. You got BC and Tilly. You got John Morant, Shaq Buchanan. You hear me? Keep the Immaculate vibes going by bringing in everybody's best friends. But my favorite trade though is just adding Culver to a guy like Kyle Anderson and going to get a guy like Kyle Kuzma. That's probably my favorite trade possibility. I don't know if it's a possibility, but I mean, with Beal being out for the season now, does Washington start to try to sell off some of their longer term contracts to free up more cap space? Kind of similar to what Portland's doing. We'll see. I think Tommy Shepard's a little smarter than the Portland GM in that regard, but that's kind of like what I'm looking for. I'm ready to just see like what move out of left field. Mainly it all starts with Culver because, like you said, you can attach him to players, attach him to picks. You can go get a smaller salary guy. You can attach him to someone else, get a high salary guy. Who knows? But very interested to see what they're going to do.
Yeah, and let's be honest also, at the end of the day, when it comes to Kyle Anderson, I know that he's an important part of this locker room. I know that he's someone that a lot of these players love. But in my opinion, Kyle Anderson is probably more value as the 8th or 9th guy on a team that you may think is more of a contender right now than the Grizzlies are, than he is as the 9th guy on the Grizzlies. That's just the truth in my opinion. And I think that if you start looking at deals where you potentially use Culver and maybe a late first, and then attach Kyle Anderson to it, the other thing that allows for is it then allows for you to potentially look at these 3 or 4 team deals. You typically don't see that big a deal at the trade deadline, but if you were to take Kyle Anderson, he goes to another team like a Brooklyn or a Boston. You have Culver and a first-round pick going to maybe a Washington, for instance, and then then Kyle Kuzma coming to Memphis. You could turn this into like a 3-team deal where the acquiring team for Kyle Anderson redirects him to a contending team. So that's the whole point. When you start stacking Culver, then a first round pick, then Kyle Anderson, I think that there could be value in one of those scenarios where a Kuzma or somebody of that ilk is available. And if a team is just ready to get assets instead of that player over the next 1 to 2 years, that's where the Grizzlies could strike. There are moves to be made out there, even if it's not a Jeremy Grant or a Harrison Barnes.
Yep, I agree. I agree for sure. I think one move I really am interested in monitoring is the Marvin Bagley situation. I don't know if you saw this around the draft. It was reported by Brian Windhorst that the Grizzlies and Kings had discussions for Marvin Bagley in the 9th pick for Jonas Valanciunas. And I just kind of wonder where those conversations fell off. Granted, it could have probably been the fact that New Orleans was willing to throw in a extra first round pick in that Lakers pick. That could have been what did it. But I would really be interested to see like where it fell apart, because if it was just an offer that was topped and trumped, because I think that Pelicans offer is better regardless of what you think of the 9th pick or Marvin Bagley. Steven Adams is better. You get an extra first round pick, one spot difference, not the end of the world. But it just shows that does this team have interest in Marvin Bagley? And I know you got to be careful in how many assets you give up for him, because for one, he's been pretty underwhelming, but two, he could be a restricted free agent this off season. But I mean, if you can go do a deal like Culver, Tillman, and a second round pick for Marvin Bagley, and you at least get him into your system and see how he does. Granted, he may not play that much because you already have a very loaded front court, but just see what he can provide. Who knows? Maybe you can bring him back on a pretty solid deal and he becomes something. It's pretty far fetched. I don't think they're going to tinker like that, but for one, if you told 2018 Parker this, he would be over the moon right now.
You're hitting on an idea that I ultimately think may be the best one for the Grizzlies, and we'll discuss that in just a moment. Before we do, now I don't know Parker's level of intelligence when it comes to repairing cars. He could be like Tim the Toolman Taylor. He may need someone else to do it. I know I need others to do it myself, but I can tell you this: rockauto.com is the best place for you to go, whether it's just a few clicks of the button to get a small part or a big part, regardless of the make and model. RockAuto.com is likely to have it. They're a family-owned business. They've been in business for over 20 years. They know car parts typically fall out of budget, so they're going to make things as economically feasible as possible. Visit RockAuto.com today and let them know the Locked On Podcast Network sent you. RockAuto.com, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the car parts you'll ever need. Visit RockAuto.com. Obviously, over the weekend, we're going to do a couple of shows of Locked On Grizzlies, breaking down all the trades that will happen over the next few hours, as well as what it could mean for the Grizzlies. Looking forward to their schedule, all that this weekend when it comes to Locked On Grizzlies. So let's go through a couple of scenarios here, Parker, and I'm going to throw this out there to you because I do think, again, the whole thing for me then is that if we know that this roster is deep, it's good for a playoff run, is there something out there that makes sense as far as the Grizzlies going to get a guy that could help them out potentially this year, but also moving forward? I personally think with how well Steven Adams has gelled in this setup with the Grizzlies, I think that is too relevant to ignore for them to try to make a play with assets to go get like a Rakan Holmes or a Christian Wood. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm not really too sold on getting Rashawn Holmes or Christian Wood. I really like that Steven Adams fit because of how he provides spacing, not as like a shooter, but as a screener. I mean, he generates so much space as a screener. He finds cutters extremely well. And one thing that he does that you can't say the same for Rashawn Holmes or Christian Wood is because of how low maintenance is the bad word, but like he doesn't need a lot of shots. He doesn't need a lot of or anything. And because you're doing that, you're giving the ball to John Morant, Jaren Jackson, and Desmond Bain. I mean, honestly, if you're just gonna go make a play for a guy like Christian Wood or Rashawn Holmes, why don't you just keep Jonas Valanciunas? Like, it's kind of where I'm at with that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just would rather have Steven Adams on this team because it empowers the other players so much. So yeah, he kind of does make that need a little less warranted. It makes
And
it
if
more of a
anybody,
want instead of a need.
exactly. And the other thing that I'll say is that if anybody needs to know how good the Steven Adams year is going, I understand that counting statistics wise, outside of offensive rebounds and assists, it may not be there where it's been in the past. But when you can find a guy that can add as much value as he doing without having the ball that much at all, that obviously is certainly encouraging. So the long-term need again for Jaren Jackson Jr. in terms of an established talent may not potentially be there. But I do like the idea that you brought up about Marvin Bagley because there's another player out there who I think could be something the Grizzlies look at. It is reported that the Knicks have basically made their entire roster available. That could mean maybe an Alec Burks is someone that the Grizzlies could go after, though probably a bit too rich for his overall value at Timmy and per year. I think that goes through the next 2 years. But Cam Reddish, who was just traded from the Hawks to the Grizzlies. See, I feel that if you get a Marvin Bagley with the restricted rights that you would have for him to potentially sign a cheap second contract at the end of this year, or a Cam Reddish with the flashes that he's shown to be in the system next year, that's the other move that I think could be made with the Culver. Maybe making the move for a fellow bust so far in his career that could come in and be a better fit than Culver is in the development track of the Grizzlies that you could control beyond this year. Seems like you may not have the same feelings, but what are your thoughts, Parker?
Ah, dude, it's just one of those things like, okay, would you give up Culver and in your own first round pick this year for Cam Reddish? Would you do that?
Probably so.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of apprehensive about it. I just know that you're going to have to give up a first round pick because the New York Knicks, they just gave up a first round pick for him. Talk about a catastrophic scenario there. Trade for Cam Reddish because he wants a bigger opportunity, and then Tibbs is like, "Nah, I didn't want him." Typical. It's wild that the Knicks are just back to being the Knicks. Universe is restoring its balance now. But anyways, yeah. I mean, if it comes down to it, if you're saying, "Hey, would you rather go take a chance on Marvin Bagley or Cam Reddish?" I would say Cam Reddish because I mean, Marvin Bagley is not better than Jaren Jackson, Steven Adams, or Brandon Clark. So where because of those redundancies, especially with Adams and Clark, where is there room for him? Now, if you said, hey, the Grizzlies are if you had hindsight vision, 2020 vision, and said, hey, the Grizzlies are about to make this consolidation trade where they're going to trade Dylan Brooks, Brandon Clark, and D'Anthony Melton and 3 first-round picks for Jaylen Brown. Yeah, go get Marvin Bagley because he fills in that Brandon Clark spot, but he's not. And he also doesn't really have that same like vertical pop as Brandon Clark does, or even like a counterpart like Rashawn Holmes does. I would much rather go for Cam Reddish because that's kind of the MO of this team. They're really you can tell in the swings that they've taken that they want a big wing. Justice Winslow, Jarrett Culver, Josh Jackson, Zaire Williams. He fits that MO, but it's it's kind of interesting. Like, do you want to kind of deal with the politics of a guy wanting a bigger role who's not really deserving a bit of a bigger role yet out of your 10th man? Do you want that? That's gonna kind of jack with the vibes a little bit, don't you think?
It could. But in my opinion, you get him in the development track, you get him through the summer, and then when he potentially next year is your 8th or ninth man, and you could see what he potentially could become through that, that's enticing. However, I do think that it also is certainly relevant. Why haven't we seen that 3 years into his career? It certainly makes sense. So that's the thing that keeps coming back to fruition, Parker. I'm going to be honest. I'm not necessarily going to be frustrated, but you know more than anybody, probably more than anybody, how much I put emphasis on getting future value for what you have in the present. I am a huge stickler for that, probably to be an annoying. You don't have to agree or disagree on that. Please don't. But my point is that is something that I certainly want to see and that you've seen this front office make a big emphasis on. So I'm out there just shopping Culver in 2 seconds, Culver in a first, Culver and Kyle Anderson in 2 seconds, Culver and Kyle Anderson in the first, and just seeing if you can take it up to the final minute to get a guy who not only can you control for that salary level this year, but also next year as well. At the end of the day, if I get a reasonable to significant talent that could help me out in a pinch this year, but step into a bigger role and really be a good rotation piece next year, I value that over even a Culver, Anderson, and a late first, especially if you're not going to extend Anderson. That's my overall viewpoint of the trade deadline. What says Parker Fleming?
I just want the team to be opportunistic, cautiously opportunistic. I don't know how big of a WWE guy you are, but in the roundtable on GBB, I compared it to WWE superstar, WWE Hall of Famer Edge, the ultimate opportunist. You got to take advantage of your vulnerable teams and cash in on the right trade. I'm mainly looking at a team like Washington with Kuzma, or even if they said, "Hey, let's go get KCP," like I'm not gonna hate that either. Portland with Josh Hart, someone just try to find a way to make a really good move around the margins. You don't have to shape the team to its core. That's what the offseason's for. But just try to find something around the margins to where you have options going into a playoff series. You have just a deeper options. And like if it doesn't pan out, it's just around the margins. It's not like you traded away Dylan Brooks or Brandon Clark or Steven Adams. Like you made, or DeAnthony Melton or Tyus Jones. Like you turned Culver and a guy that you didn't extend, and the guy's going to be a free agent, and Kyle Anderson. Like, okay, you tried, didn't work. What's next? So I just want to move around the margins a little bit.
And that's where this team has excelled. And the good thing, though, is you want the excitement. I mentioned this the other day. I want that excitement. But then you realize when it comes to the Grizzlies, these teams that are making these big moves like the Domantas Sabonis for Tyrese Halliburton trade between the Pacers and the Kings, you're seeing these teams make these moves to gain the stability the Grizzlies have had now for more than a calendar year. That's what stands out. That's what makes sense. But in terms of your comparison to Edge, as someone that's excited, and for me, who does have the benefit of flash photography, I would like to see some new and exciting face in a Grizzlies uniform. So, Parker, I'll ask you this question. 2 names out there that you think are realistic that you would like to see in a Grizzlies uniform. I don't think they're trading a Melton. I don't think they're trading a Clark. I don't think you're really seeing a big move out there. But when you're matching up maybe a Culver in a first, or if you want to go big level to a Culver and an Anderson in a first, 2 names out there that you really want to see. One that we've already talked about, because I think I know who your number 1 name is going to be, but maybe another one who you think could be a dark horse candidate to be a Grizzly by this time tomorrow night.
Kyle Kuzma, number 1. Josh Hart, number 2.
Yeah,
hold up. Wait, I already said Josh Hart. So let me give one more dark horse, and that is Jimmy Lamb.
Okay, fair enough. I'll go Josh Hart and Cam Reddish myself. I will go Josh Hart and Cam Reddish.
Reddish.
Yeah.
Actually, let me make you happy. Let me make you happy real quick. I'm going to read this report real quick, and I am going to just, after I tell you this, you're going to want to make me your permanent co-host of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast once I can get to this. Wow. People tweet a lot. I tell you what, it's wild times out here. All right, let's see.
Now, don't tell me now, because see, I may have a conflicting report of what you're about to report, but go ahead.
All right. Blank rookie, blank is listed on today's injury report as G League assignment or G League on assignment, but the blank game is in the second quarter and he's not played. Take from that whatever you will. And that player, sir, is Jaden Springer.
Oh, I love it. And I would love to see it. But it's kind of like that Josh Hart situation. I would love to see him come to the Grizzlies, but I think that in getting Josh Hart, you probably need to move on from DeAnthony Melton.
I don't know about that. Like, could you turn? Like, if let's say there's a big job, they said that Simmons Harden trade can grow up to like 4 or 5 teams, and there's a mystery team in there. Like maybe, just maybe, could the Grizzlies find their way in and get Jaden Springer, who I remember, I think I saw something on like after draft night where they said if the Grizzlies stayed at 17, the pick was likely going to be Springer. I think I saw that somewhere, but like, what do you think? What do you? So I thought you could be more excited for it because I mentioned a Tennessee basketball player that has a chance to be kind of good, and the Grizzlies can kind of get, like I said, get him into the development system, have 3 years left on his rookie deal, and you have different avenues to pivot with where you can slot him, whether that's the combo guard off the bench or the backup point guard. So
We'll see. We'll
I
see. I
wanted
mean,
to make you
Keon
happy here.
Johnson, or you potentially, what you could do is in the same move where you trade a Kyle Anderson and maybe a Jerry Culver elsewhere, you get Keon Johnson and Josh Hart both from the Portland Trailblazers.
I don't. You are obsessed with Keon Johnson. I brought up the superior prospect. So
wow, we're just getting into Tennessee prospects here. The thing though is at the end of the day, there's a lot of speculation. Listen, I know that trade scenarios and things like that are a lot of fun to talk about. At the end of the day, for the Grizzlies, there probably is. This is the point though to make, and this is what we'll finish on. Is that at the end of the day, all the different trade scenarios, I think that many more players, many more avenues to a significant trade for the Grizzlies are just significantly over the summer than they are right now. And at the end of the day, you really want to focus on the fact that the expiring contracts and maybe a first-round pick from 2022, those are the assets that are out there. I think that's what makes the most sense. But even if the Grizzlies don't make a move, they still have the opportunity to make that move in the summer, even if it's to sign in a trade. So, Parker Fleming, the last question I'll ask you is this. Even if a trade itself does not go through, how likely do you think that it is the Grizzlies are having conversations right now like they did with the Jazz 2 years ago when they traded Mike Conley to them in the summer? How likely do you think it is right now discussions are going on now that could lead to a significant deal for the Grizzlies over the summer?
I think it's about 110%, to be honest. I think a lot of teams kind of want to see how the landscape shakes. The Grizzlies have a lot of assets, a lot of good young players on affordable deals, potentially about 20 mil in cap space, 3 first-round picks, plus a pick that they're going to get from Golden State around 2024, plus all their own future first. I think we can see something. I think we see a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different ways it can go, but I definitely think that those talks could be starting like right now.
It's going to be fun to see. And at the end of the day, it's so much fun covering a team that even if they make a move or not, as exciting as it would be, someone like me who loves trades, someone such as yourself who does enjoy a good trade, but also certainly values the immaculate vibes that are out there, it's so much fun to watch. Parker Fleming, it's been a pleasure as always, sir.
It's been a blast. I'm sorry you had to power through the technical difficulty, but we still had immaculate conversation.
Not a problem at all. Immaculate is going to be the word of the day, regardless of whether a trade is made or not. One thing that I will say is that Parker has a great piece out talking about DeAnthony Melton as well as Jaren Jackson Jr., talking about their overall ability to shoot the threes going on for the Grizzlies. That's something else that certainly could help out. If DeAnthony Melton, who's been hot from 3 over the past 10 games, Jaren Jackson Jr. can get going from 3, get Dylan Brooks back, that really could take care of that 3-point need, even if a trade doesn't happen. But Parker, obviously, it seems like every other day you're pumping out a new, very good, great article. Obviously, all the podcasts you got going on. What can we look forward to as far as your end goes over the next several weeks leading up to the playoffs?
Let's see. More film, more podcasts, some features. Try to come up with some more features that I can get some like good quotes from, good sound bites. I think I got something I could probably get cooked up here next week in light of John Morant's All-Star bid. I think I got something that not a lot of people will talk about, but I think I'll get something.
Film, features, fabulous podcast. The Parker Fleming way of doing things. Of course, you can find me at StatsSEC on Twitter. the show at Locked On Grizz right here on YouTube as well. Hit that subscribe button below. Make sure to check out the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, the Locked On NBA podcast, instant reaction from myself if a trade were to go down at any point in time during today. And also check out Parker at Paca_Flocka on Twitter. Obviously, his stuff over at Grizzly Bear Blues, GBB Live, as well as the Longview podcast. For Parker Fleming, my name's Shawn Coleman. Cannot thank you enough for joining us. Go Grizzlies. We'll see if we have anything to talk about come to Friday's show. But until then, we also will be with you tomorrow talking about their matchup against the Detroit Pistons as well. So much fun to talk about. Have a great one. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.